After my son's funeral, I inherited his old SUV, while his wife walked away with everything else: the house, the patents, the millions, the life insurance. She pressed the keys into my palm with a smile that never reached her eyes. "It's old, just like you. Keep it as a memory." I said nothing. I drove that old truck home alone, parked it in my garage, and sat behind the wheel in the dark. That was when the GPS screen flickered on by itself, showing a single address I had never seen before. I was wrong about almost everything. Thank you for tuning into Dad's Revenge Stories. I highly appreciate your presence. Let's connect. Which country or city are you streaming this from? Please note this narrative incorporates fictional elements for entertainment and education. Any similarity to names or locations is completely coincidental, but the lesson remains highly valuable. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and central heating, the kind of warmth that doesn't actually make you feel any better. I sat in a stiff-backed chair across from a mahogany desk that probably cost more than my first car, watching a man named Gerald Fitch shuffle through papers like he had all the time in the world. He didn't. None of us did. My son had been in the ground for 6 days, and every hour since felt like walking through wet concrete. There were 4 of us in that room. Gerald Fitch at the desk, Victoria across from me wearing a black dress that fit just right, and a diamond pendant I'd never seen before. Me in my Sunday suit, the one Margaret had bought me 12 years ago, that still smelled faintly of the cedar closet. And Martha Griggs, who had been the Brennan family housekeeper for 19 years, and had insisted on coming because, as she told me that morning, "Somebody decent ought to be in that room with you, Arthur." Outside in the parking lot, I knew Earl Simmons was sitting in his old Chevy pickup, too stubborn to come inside but too worried to drive away. And Deputy Frank Kowalski had shaken my hand that morning, outside the funeral home, and pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm with his phone number on it. "You call me if anything feels wrong," he'd said quietly. Frank had known Julian since the boy was throwing newspapers on Maple Avenue. 20 years of watching that kid grow up gave a man certain instincts. Gerald Fitch cleared his throat and began. The house on Birchwood Lane in Shaker Heights went to Victoria. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a finished basement. Julian had converted into a home lab where he'd built things I couldn't begin to understand. Gone. The investment portfolio, the result of 15 years as stewards of Julian working 100-hour weeks and living below his means, went to Victoria. $1.2 million. Gone. The savings accounts, the retirement funds, the technology consulting contracts still generating income. All of it to Victoria. I watched her the whole time Gerald Fitch was reading. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her expression perfectly arranged into something that looked like dignified grief. Every few minutes, she would reach up and touch that diamond pendant, like she was drawing comfort from it. I noticed her fingernails were freshly done, deep red. She'd found time for that in the 6 days since my son died. And to Arthur James Brennan, Gerald Fitch continued adjusting his reading glasses. "Father of the deceased, I leave my 2018 Ford Explorer Sport Vehicle Identification Number, beginning 1FM5K8, with the sincere hope that it provides him comfort and utility in the years ahead." The room went quiet in a particular way that rooms go quiet when everyone present knows something deeply wrong has just happened, but no one is quite sure what to say about it. Martha made a sound beside me. Not a word. Just a small, involuntary intake of breath, like someone had pressed a thumb into a bruise. Victoria reached into her handbag and produced a set of keys. She leaned across the space between us and held them out with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The keychain still had Julian's old Cleveland Guardians bottle opener attached to it. He'd had that thing since 2014. "Here you go, Arthur," she said softly. "I know how much he loved that truck. It's only right that you have it." I took the keys. I kept my face neutral the way my father had taught me to keep my face neutral when a foreman told you something unfair and you still needed the job. You learned that particular stillness growing up working class in Cleveland. You learned to absorb things without letting them show. "Thank you, Victoria," I said. She tilted her head slightly, like she was studying me for a reaction she wasn't getting. Then she said it, low enough that Gerald Fitch, still gathering his papers, might not have caught it. But I caught it. Martha caught it too because I felt her go rigid in the chair beside me. "It's old," Victoria said pleasantly. "Just like you. Keep it as a memory." I looked at her for a long moment. She held my gaze with complete composure, that small smile still in place, fingers returning to the diamond pendant. 40 years of raising Julian. 40 years of double shifts at the Lakewood machine shop, of packing his school lunches before 5 in the morning, of driving him to robotics competitions in Columbus and Ann Arbor, and once all the way to Boston. 40 years of being his father. And this woman was handing me a set of car keys like she was doing me a favor. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and thanked Gerald Fitch for his time. In the parking lot, Earl was already out of his truck before I reached the door. He was 69 years old and built like a man who had spent 5 decades arguing with metal for a living, which he had. He took one look at my face and said nothing, which was exactly right, because there was nothing to say yet. We drove back to Lakewood in separate cars, me and Julian's Explorer, Earl following behind in his Chevy. The seat was adjusted for Julian's height, longer legs than mine, and I had to reach down and slide it forward. The cab smelled like him. He'd picked it up from me the way sons pick things up from fathers without realizing it. I pulled into my driveway and sat there with the engine running for a long moment, both hands on the wheel, staring at the garage door. 6 days since the highway patrol called. 6 days since a young officer with tired eyes had sat across from me at my kitchen table and explained that Julian's Explorer had gone off the access road on Route 14, rolled twice, and come to rest against the guardrail. The officer had used words like instantaneous and no indication of suffering, which I understood were meant to help but didn't. I turned off the engine. The dashboard went dark. And then after a second, the GPS screen flickered back on by itself, glowing soft blue in the dim garage light, showing a single saved address I had never seen before. I leaned forward and looked at it. Just an address. Somewhere in Parma. Julian must have forgotten to clear it. I sat back and looked at that address for a long time. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay on my side of the bed, my side, always my side, even after 8 years of sleeping alone since Margaret passed, and stared at the ceiling while the November wind pushed against the bedroom windows. Cleveland in November has a particular kind of cold that doesn't just sit on your skin. It gets into the walls, into the floors, into the spaces between things. I'd lived in this house for 31 years, and I still wasn't used to it. At 5:47 in the morning, I gave up trying and went downstairs to make coffee. The kitchen still had the sympathy casseroles on the counter. 3 of them covered in foil with little handwritten notes. Mrs. Patricia Dunbar from next door. The Okafor family from the end of the block. Earl had brought a pot of his wife Dorothy's bean soup, which he'd carried over himself and set on the stove without saying a word about it. I stood in the kitchen in my robe and drank my coffee and looked at those casseroles and felt the particular loneliness of a house that used to have more people in it. By 7, I was in the garage. I told myself I was just checking the Explorer over. Old habit. 40 years of working machinery meant I couldn't let a vehicle sit in my garage without knowing what shape it was in. Julian had always teased me about it. "Dad," he used to say, laughing from the passenger seat whenever I pulled into a gas station to check the oil even on short trips. "The car is fine. The car is always fine because you check it every 48 hours whether it needs it or not. I'd tell him that's exactly why it was always fine, and he'd shake his head like I was a hopeless case still smiling. The garage was cold. I pulled on my heavy canvas work jacket, the one with the Brennan machine and auto embroidered on the chest pocket, the shop I'd run for 22 years, before my knees made the decision for me, and I turned on the overhead fluorescence. The light hummed and settled. Julian's tools were still on my pegboard. He'd left a set of metric wrenches here 2 summers ago, when we'd spent a long weekend rebuilding the carburetor on my old 1989 Silverado. I'd meant to return them a dozen times. Now I stood in front of that pegboard and looked at those wrenches hanging in a neat row and felt something move through my chest that I didn't have a name for. Not grief, exactly. Something older than grief. Something that had to do with the specific weight of a tool that a person's hand has shaped over years of use. I turned to the Explorer. In the daylight of the garage, it looked both familiar and wrong. Same silver exterior Julian had kept meticulously clean. Same small dent above the rear passenger wheel well from when he'd caught a parking garage pillar in downtown Cleveland 2 winters ago. He'd called me immediately after it happened, more embarrassed than upset, and I'd told him a dent just meant the car had a history. He'd laughed at that. I walked around it once, slowly, the way I'd walked around every vehicle that came into my shop. Tires even. No obvious fluid leaks underneath. Mirrors intact. Then I opened the driver's door and got in. The cedar air freshener was almost gone. Just the faintest trace of it now mixing with the cold leather smell of the interior. I adjusted the seat forward, the same as I'd done the night before, and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. Earl knocked on the garage door frame at 7:30. "Coffee's on at my place," he said. He was already in his work coat, a thermos tucked under one arm. Earl Simmons had been my neighbor for 24 years, and my friend for all of them, the kind of friend who showed up without being asked and left without making you feel like you owed him anything. "I've got coffee," I said. "Mine's better." He came in anyway and leaned against the workbench, looking at the Explorer, the way we both looked at vehicles, assessing, respectful of what we didn't know yet. "How's she running?" "Haven't taken her out yet, just looking her over." He nodded and said nothing more about it, which was Earl's particular genius. He could stand in a garage with a grieving man and make the silence feel useful rather than empty. We'd been doing that for each other since Dorothy's cancer scare in 2011 and my own bad year in 2015, when my knee gave out and the shop had to close, and I didn't much feel like talking to anyone for about 4 months. I reached forward and pressed the ignition. The Explorer started clean. Good engine sound, no hesitation, no warning lights. Julian had kept it well maintained, which didn't surprise me. He'd learned from somebody. The GPS screen came alive. I hadn't thought about it since last night. Or rather, I'd thought about nothing else but had managed to convince myself it was nothing, the way you convince yourself of things at 2 in the morning when the alternative is too large to hold. But there it was again. A saved address on Route 14 out in Parma, sitting in the system, like it had always been there. "Earl," I said. "Yeah." "You ever drive somewhere just because an address showed up in a GPS?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then depends whose GPS." I looked at the address on the screen. Julian had been meticulous about his devices. He cleared his search history, he organized his contacts alphabetically, he never left anything on any screen he didn't mean to be there. I thought about the Cleveland Guardian's bottle opener still on the keychain, the metric wrenches on my pegboard, the cedar air freshener almost gone. "I think I'm going to take a drive," I said. Earl looked at the GPS screen. He looked at me. He picked up his thermos and straightened up from the workbench. "You want company?" "Not yet," I said, "but keep your phone on." Parma was 20 minutes southwest of Lakewood, on a good day maybe 30 in November, when the lake effect clouds came down low and turned the whole world the color of old concrete. I'd driven through Parma 100 times over the years. It was that kind of Cleveland suburb that existed mostly in the background of other things, a place you passed through on the way to somewhere else. Strip malls and working-class neighborhoods, and a water tower with the city name painted on it in letters that had been fading since about 1983. I pulled out of my driveway at 8:15. The Explorer handled well on the wet pavement, better than I'd expected from a vehicle with 112,000 miles on it. Julian had kept up with the maintenance, same as I'd taught him. Rotate the tires every 6,000 miles. Change the oil before the light tells you to. Don't wait for things to break before you pay attention to them. He'd rolled his eyes at that particular lesson approximately 400 times between the ages of 16 and 37, and then he'd gone and followed it anyway, the way children follow the lessons they pretended not to learn. I had the GPS address plugged in, but I knew the general direction. Route 14 southwest, then off onto one of those industrial side roads that Parma had plenty of, the kind that serviced warehouses and small manufacturing operations. The economic skeleton underneath the suburb's residential skin. I'd done enough work in that part of the county during my shop years to know the territory. My phone rang at 8:42. Victoria's name on the screen. I looked at it for 2 full rings before I answered. "Arthur." Her voice was warm and careful, the way it always was when she wanted something or was checking on something. "Mrs. Henderson from your street called me. She said she saw you leaving early this morning. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." I kept my eyes on the road. The wipers moved steadily against a light drizzle. "I'm fine, Victoria," I said. "Just taking the Explorer out for a drive. Getting used to it." "Oh, that's a good idea." A small pause. "Where are you headed?" "Nowhere in particular. Just driving. It helps me think." "Of course." Another pause slightly longer than the first. "You know you can call me anytime, Arthur. Whatever you need. We're all we have left of him." The words landed with the particular weight she'd intended them to land with, heavy with manufactured warmth. I'd heard that phrase before, "we're all we have left of him," and each time she said it, it sounded less like comfort and more like a property claim. "I know that, Victoria," I said. "Thank you for checking in. Drive safe. The roads are slick today." She hung up first. I set the phone on the passenger seat and exhaled slowly. The drizzle was picking up, coming in heavier now, off Lake Erie the way it did in November, and the Explorer's wipers worked harder to keep up with it. I thought about the way she'd asked where I was headed, the specificity of it. Not just "how are you," but "where are you going?" Filed that away. The GPS directed me off Route 14 onto a 2-lane road called Stenson Industrial Parkway, which was a generous name for what turned out to be a cracked asphalt strip running between chain-link fences and long, low buildings with roll-up doors. Most of them looked like they hadn't seen active use in a while. A trucking company with half its signage missing. A metal fabrication shop, dark inside. A lot full of construction equipment parked and tarped for the season. I almost missed it. The address was a warehouse at the far end of the strip, set back from the road behind a gravel lot. Smaller than the others, maybe 60 feet wide, built from the same gray cinder block that everything in industrial Parma seemed to be built from. No signage. A roll-up door closed. A regular door beside it, with a combination lock on the handle. I pulled into the gravel lot and sat with the engine running. There was no reason on earth for Julian to have this address saved in his GPS. He was an AI engineer. His world was software and algorithms and research presentations in conference rooms that had better coffee than my whole kitchen. He had no business in a place like this, no connection to Parma's industrial corridor that I'd ever known about. Which meant he'd put this address here for a reason. I turned off the engine and got out into the November air. The gravel crunched under my boots. The drizzle had settled into a cold mist that sat on everything and made the cinder block walls look darker than they were. The combination lock on the regular door was a 4-digit model. I stood in front of it and thought about Julian. About the way he thought, the way he built things, the way he hid things in plain sight when he needed to. He'd been doing that since he was 9 years old, hiding his good baseball cards inside the cases of his least valuable ones, because he'd worked out that nobody looks inside the thing they've already dismissed. I tried 0409. April 9th, my birthday. The lock opened. The door swung inward into darkness, and the smell hit me first, motor oil and cold metal, and something else underneath it, something familiar that took me a full 3 seconds to place. And then I placed it. Cedar. The same cedar air freshener Julian used in every vehicle he'd ever owned. I reached inside and found the light switch. The fluorescent lights took a few seconds to warm up, flickering twice before they steadied into a cold, white glow that reached every corner of the warehouse. I stood in the doorway and looked at what my son had left me. It was a 2018 Ford Explorer Sport. Silver exterior. Same model year, same trim level, same color as the vehicle I'd driven here this morning. For one disorienting moment, my brain tried to tell me I was looking at a reflection, that somehow the Explorer I'd parked outside had gotten in here ahead of me. Then the details started resolving themselves the way details do when you've spent 40 years training your eyes to look at things carefully rather than just seeing them. The front bumper had a hairline crack along the lower left edge. The Explorer outside didn't. The side mirrors were the non-heated model, the base package. Julian's daily driver had heated mirrors because he'd grown up watching me scrape ice off mirrors every Cleveland winter, and had decided the moment he could afford it, that he would never do that himself. And on the rear passenger door just above the wheel well, there was no dent. The Explorer in my driveway had a dent there. Small old the one from the parking garage downtown 2 winters ago. This was not a copy of Julian's car. This was Julian's car. The original. The one he'd actually driven for 6 years. Which meant the vehicle I'd been driving, the one the highway patrol had identified, the one that had gone off Route 14, that was the duplicate. Same VIN plate, same registration paperwork, same external appearance. Different vehicle underneath. My legs carried me forward before I'd consciously decided to move. I walked around the Explorer slowly, one hand trailing along the hood, the way I'd walked around every vehicle that came into my shop, reading it, the way you read something written in a language you've spent your whole life learning. The tires were fully inflated. No dust on the hood, which meant someone had been here recently. The engine was cold, but not long cold, maybe 2 or 3 days since it had last been run. Julian had been here. Recently. I opened the driver's door, and the cedar air freshener smell hit me again, once stronger this time, real this time, not the ghost of it. I'd been breathing in the duplicate. On the center console, there was a coffee ring stain from a travel mug, the permanent kind that sets into the plastic over months of use. In the door pocket, a folded road map of northeastern Ohio. Julian had always kept paper maps as backup. Another habit he'd picked up from me despite rolling his eyes about it consistently for 20 years. Under the driver's seat, my fingers found a laptop case. Small black, the kind that held a 10-inch tablet rather than a full computer. I pulled it out and set it on the passenger seat. The zipper had a small piece of orange electrical tape on the pull tab. The same orange electrical tape I kept in a roll on my workbench had kept there for 30 years. Julian knew exactly where I kept it. He'd been reaching for that role since he was tall enough to reach the workbench. Inside the case was a tablet and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded the paper first. The handwriting was Julian's. Compact, precise, the way engineers write every letter, formed with the same deliberate economy he brought to everything else. Dad, if you're reading this, you found the car. I knew you would. You always check everything twice. My throat closed around something hard and sharp. The tablet has two things on it. The first is the black box data from this vehicle, the real one. I need you to look at the navigation and driver assistance logs from the 6 weeks before the accident. You'll know what you're looking at. You spent 40 years reading machines. Read this one. The second thing is a camera file. I'm sorry in advance for what it shows. I need you to watch it anyway. I love you, Dad. I'll explain everything when the time is right. Trust the data. I sat in the driver's seat of my dead son's real car in a warehouse in Parma, Ohio, holding a letter in handwriting. I would have recognized anywhere in the world, and I understood three things simultaneously. Julian had known something was going to happen. Julian had prepared for it. And Julian, whatever else was true, had trusted me above every other person in his life to find this place open, this case, and read what the machines had to say. I pressed the power button on the tablet. The screen came to life, and the first thing I saw was the navigation log, 6 weeks of route data, timestamps, location history. The kind of record that a vehicle's onboard computer keeps automatically, invisibly, every mile of every drive. I scrolled to the final entry. The timestamp read the morning of the accident. Route 14 westbound. Speed normal. Lane position normal. And then at a specific coordinate I recognized as the curve above the access road, a single anomalous entry in the driver assistance column. 4 words that made my hands go still on the screen. External override command received. I sat with the tablet in my lap for a long moment before I opened the camera file. The black box data was bad enough. External override command received 4 words that turned a tragic accident into something else entirely. Something with intent behind it. Something that had been planned and executed by a person or persons who had decided my son's life was worth less than whatever they stood to gain from ending it. I understood what those words meant. I'd spent 40 years working with machines, and machines don't lie. They record what happens and they report it faithfully without agenda, without the ability to be charmed or threatened or paid off. Someone had taken control of Julian's vehicle from outside and driven it off that road. I pressed play on the camera file. The footage was from a wide-angle dashcam mounted behind the rearview mirror, angled slightly downward, to capture both the road ahead and the front interior of the cabin. The timestamp in the corner read, 8 weeks ago, a Tuesday evening, 7:43 post-meridium. The Explorer was parked in the driveway of the Shaker Heights house, Julian's house, Victoria's house, the house she now owned outright, along with everything inside it. Julian walked into frame from the front door and got into the driver's seat. He was still in his work clothes, the charcoal dress shirt. He favored sleeves rolled to the elbows, the way he always wore them when he'd been at his desk for hours. He looked tired in the way that people look tired when something is eating at them from the inside. Not the clean tiredness of honest work, but something heavier and more complicated. He set his phone on the center console and pulled up something on the screen. Text messages. I couldn't read them from the camera angle, but I could read his face. I had been reading that face for 37 years, through every disappointment and confusion and heartbreak it had ever carried. And what I saw moving across it now was something I hadn't seen there before. Not anger, not grief, something colder and more careful than either of those things. The face of a man who has just confirmed something he had been hoping was wrong. He sat very still for almost a full minute. Then the front door of the house opened, and Victoria stepped out onto the porch. She was dressed to go somewhere, heels, the kind of dark coat she wore to what she called client dinners. She hadn't seen Julian's car in the driveway yet. She was looking at her phone, texting rapidly, and she was smiling the way people smile when they think no one is watching them. A car pulled up to the curb. Dark blue sedan, expensive. The driver got out. He was tall, early 40s, the kind of man who spent considerable time and money presenting himself as effortlessly put together. He wore a dark overcoat and moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the most credentialed person in any room. Victoria looked up from her phone, and her whole face changed, opened up in a way I had never once seen it open in all the years she had been part of our family. She walked down the porch steps toward him. In the driver's seat, Julian watched. I watched Julian watch them. His hands were flat on his thighs, completely still, and his jaw was set in that particular way it set when he was processing something difficult and refusing to let it show on his face, a habit he had, I realized, with a hollow ache, learned directly from me. The man in the overcoat was Dr. Christian Hale. I didn't know his name yet, sitting in that warehouse in Parma, but I would learn it soon enough. What I knew in that moment was what Julian had known in that moment, that this was not a new arrangement. The ease between them, the way Victoria moved toward him, without hesitation, the way he put his hand at the small of her back as they walked to his car, this had been going on for a long time. Julian picked up his phone from the console. He made a call. It went to voicemail. "Dad?" His voice was steady but stripped of everything except the essential. "I need to tell you something. I don't know when I'll be able to tell you in person, so I'm leaving this here. I'm leaving a few things here, actually, in case I need you to find them." He paused. "I found out tonight that my marriage has been something different than what I thought it was. But that's not the important part. The important part is what I found in her laptop 3 days ago. Dad, they're not just—" He stopped, took one careful breath. "I can't say it on a voicemail, but I'm going to document everything, and I'm going to put it somewhere safe, and the safe place is going to be somewhere only you would think to look. Because if something happens to me, I need it to be you who finds it, not anyone else. You." The recording ended. I pressed pause and sat in the cold warehouse with November pressing against the walls, and my son's voice still in the air of that small space. And I did something I had not done since the highway patrol officer sat at my kitchen table 6 days ago and told me Julian was gone. I pressed both hands over my face and I wept. Not quietly, not with any dignity. The kind of weeping that comes up from somewhere below the chest, that takes your shoulders with it, that has nothing to do with composure or what other people might think if they could see you. Because in that moment, there was nothing in the world except the sound of your child's voice telling you he needed you, and you hadn't been there to answer. After a while, it stopped, the way those things stop, leaving a strange clarity behind. I lowered my hands. I looked at the tablet screen. The footage was still paused on Julian's face in the driver's seat, caught mid-profile, jaw-set eyes forward, watching a life he'd built, being walked away from toward a blue sedan at the curb. There was a second video file beneath the first. I pressed play. This one was different, not dashcam footage, but a direct recording. Julian sitting facing the camera, deliberately speaking to it, the way a person speaks to someone they trust completely. His voice was calm and organized and broke my heart with every word. "Dad," he said, "here's what I need you to know." Julian on the screen looked like a man who had made peace with something difficult. Not resigned, that wasn't the right word for it. More like the particular stillness that comes after a person has thought through every option available to them and arrived at the one they're going to take, the one that costs the most, and is also the only one that makes sense. I had seen that look on his face exactly once before when he was 17 and told me he wanted to study engineering in Boston instead of staying local for college. He'd been terrified and certain at the same time. He looked the same way now. "Dad," he said, "I need to tell you what I found, and then I need to tell you what I did about it. Please don't be angry until you've heard everything." I almost laughed at that. Almost. 3 weeks ago, I found files on Victoria's personal laptop. She'd left it open on the kitchen counter. I don't think she meant to. Inside a folder she'd labeled as tax documents, I found correspondence between her and Christian Hale going back 14 months. He paused, organizing his thoughts the way he always organized things sequentially, no wasted words. The affair I already knew about by then. That wasn't what the correspondence was about. What it was about was my life insurance policy, the beneficiary structure, the payout terms, and a very specific conversation between the two of them about how the double indemnity clause worked. My chest felt like something heavy had been set down on it. Double indemnity. I knew the term. Most people who'd worked around insurance claims for any length of time knew the term. It meant that certain life insurance policies paid twice the face value in the event of an accidental death rather than a natural one. Julian had a policy he'd taken it out 4 years ago when he started accumulating real assets, the responsible thing to do. I hadn't known the details of it. I hadn't needed to. "The policy face value is $2.4 million, Julian said. "Accidental death pays 4.8. Victoria is the sole beneficiary. Christian has debts, significant ones, the kind that don't come from bad luck, but from bad judgment, repeated over a long period of time. And Victoria has been funding a separate account for 14 months that neither I nor our joint financial advisor knew existed." He looked directly into the camera. "Dad, they were planning to make it look like an accident on the road. I found the specific route in Christian's emails. Route 14, the curve above the access road. He has connections to an automotive cybersecurity firm, the legitimate kind, the kind that gets hired to find vulnerabilities in vehicle software so manufacturers can patch them. Except Christian wasn't using that knowledge to patch anything. The external override command, the navigation log. It all locked into place with the specific terrible satisfaction of a diagnosis that explains every symptom at once. So I made a decision," Julian continued. "I couldn't go to the police with what I had. Correspondence on a laptop I'd accessed without permission, financial records I'd copied without authorization, none of it was admissible, and all of it would tip them off that I knew. The moment they knew I knew, everything would accelerate. I needed them to believe the plan had worked. I needed time to build something that would actually hold up." He reached off camera and came back with a cup of coffee, wrapping both hands around it. "I found a vehicle matching my Explorer, exactly same year, same color, same trim. Private sale cash transaction registered in a name that won't connect back to me. I spent 2 weeks making it look right. Then I staged the Route 14 scene myself on my own timeline, before they could do it on theirs. I controlled the where and the when. I made sure no one was hurt." His jaw tightened. "The details of how I managed the rest I'll explain in person. The important thing is that Victoria and Christian believe the plan worked. They think I'm gone. They think they won." He set down the coffee cup. "I'm at the old Kowalczyk workshop on Denison Avenue. You know, the one we fixed Mr. Kowalczyk's transmission there the summer I was 14, and he paid us in kielbasa and cash. I've been there for 3 weeks. I'm safe. I have everything I need." For the first time, something cracked in his voice just slightly, like a hairline fracture in something that had been held under pressure for a long time. "I miss you, Dad. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I needed you to find this first. Find all of it, because what I'm going to ask you to do next, I need you to understand the full picture before I ask it." He leaned forward slightly toward the camera. There's one more thing. The most important thing. It's in the Shaker Heights house in Victoria's office behind the mirror on the north wall. Margaret left something there. I found it 6 months ago, and I didn't know what to do with it then. I know now. His voice dropped to something quieter and much more careful. Dad, I think what happened to Mom was not what we were told it was. I think Victoria has been operating this way for longer than either of us knew. Find what Margaret left behind the mirror, read it, and then you'll understand why we have to finish this completely. The screen went dark. I sat in Julian's real car in a warehouse in Parma, Ohio, and outside the November rain tapped against the metal roof in a steady, indifferent rhythm, and inside the warehouse it was very quiet and very cold. And I was 68 years old, and my son was alive, and my wife might not have died the way I had been told she died. I put the tablet in my jacket pocket. I picked up my phone and looked at it for a moment. Then I started the Explorer and pulled out of the warehouse into the gray Cleveland morning, pointed toward Shaker Heights. Martha Griggs had worked for the Brennan family for 19 years, which meant she had known Julian since he was 18 years old and had watched him become the man he was, and which also meant that when I called her from the parking lot of a warehouse in Parma and told her I needed to get into the Shaker Heights house without Victoria knowing, she didn't ask me a single question. She just said, "Victoria has a 9 o'clock at her financial advisor's office downtown. She won't be back before noon. I'll meet you out front in 40 minutes. That was Martha, 64 years old, originally from Youngstown, built from the same practical Ohio material as everyone else I'd trusted in my life. She'd been at Margaret's bedside in the last weeks. She'd brought food to my house every day for 2 months after Margaret passed, without once making me feel like a charity case. And she had apparently been keeping a secret for 4 years that she had been waiting for exactly the right moment to tell me. She was standing on the front steps of the Shaker Heights house when I pulled up. The house was everything my house wasn't: brick and stone, 3 floors, the kind of landscaping that required a separate contractor. Julian had bought it 5 years ago, when the AI patents started generating serious income, and I had been proud of him for it in the uncomplicated way fathers are proud when their children exceed what was possible in their own generation. Now I looked at it and felt something closer to grief. She changed the alarm code last week, Martha said by way of greeting, already moving to the door with her key. But she hasn't changed the lock yet, and she hasn't thought to ask me for my key back. People like Victoria don't think about what the help might know. Inside the house smelled like fresh flowers and expensive candles. The kind of smell that's designed to feel like comfort, but actually feels like a stage set. Martha led me through the main hallway and up the stairs without speaking, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had navigated this space thousands of times and knew exactly which floorboard creaked and which didn't. Victoria's office was on the 2nd floor, north-facing room, large window overlooking the back garden. Dark wood desk, built-in shelving, and on the north wall, exactly where Julian had set a large mirror in an ornate frame, floor to ceiling, the kind that made the room look bigger than it was. She moved her desk in front of it about 4 years ago, Martha said from the doorway. Right around when Mrs. Margaret started getting sick. I always thought that was strange. You don't put a desk in front of a mirror. It blocks the light. I moved the desk chair aside and reached behind the mirror's right edge, running my fingers down the gap between the frame and the wall. Nothing. I tried the left edge. My fingers found a small catch, a deliberate notch cut into the baseboard, and when I pressed it, the bottom of the mirror swung forward an inch on a hidden hinge. Behind it was a shallow space, maybe 4 inches deep, running the width of the mirror. And in that space, wrapped in a plastic zip bag of the kind Margaret had always used to protect important documents, was a bundle of papers held together with a rubber band. I carried them to the window, The handwriting hit me before I'd read a single word. 41 years of marriage means you know a person's handwriting. The way you know their voice, the way you know the sound of their particular footstep in the hallway at night. Margaret had written with a slight leftward slant, her letters rounded and careful, the handwriting of a woman who had been taught penmanship by nuns in a Catholic school in Parma in 1962, and had never entirely lost the habit of making her letters mean something. I unfolded the first page, October 4th. 4 years ago, 2 months before she passed, feeling tired again today. Christian says it's the heart medication adjusting that fatigue is normal at this stage. Arthur keeps asking if I want him to take me to see Dr. Patterson instead, but I don't want to worry him. Victoria has been so helpful with the appointments. She drives me, she keeps track of the medications, she makes sure I take everything on schedule. I don't know what I would do without her. I turn to a page further in. Mid-November. Dizzy spell this morning worse than the others. Victoria made me tea and sat with me until it passed. She is such a devoted daughter-in-law. I told Arthur she was a blessing and I meant it, though I notice she watches me when she thinks I'm not looking. A particular kind of watching. I don't know what to make of it. Martha made a quiet sound from the doorway. I turned to the last page. The handwriting was different here, slower, the letters less sure of themselves, a hand that was fighting to stay steady. I don't want to write this down because writing it down makes it feel real. But Arthur always said, if something feels wrong with a machine, don't wait for it to break completely before you pay attention. I think something is wrong. Not with a machine. The tea Victoria brings me tastes different from the tea I make myself. I noticed it 3 weeks ago and told myself I was imagining things. I'm not imagining things. I know the difference between Earl Grey and Earl Grey with something else in it. I've been pouring it out when she isn't looking. I'm saving these pages for Arthur. He'll know what to do. He always knows what to do. If something happens to me before I can tell him myself, Arthur, I love you. And I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. I didn't want to believe it. The page ended there. I stood at the window of Victoria's office, with my wife's last words in my hands, and the November garden below me gray and bare, and Martha was crying in the doorway, with her hand over her mouth, and somewhere across town, Victoria was sitting in a financial advisor's office discussing the management of assets that had come to her through the systematic destruction of my family. Martha, I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. How long have you known? She lowered her hand. I found them 2 weeks after Mrs. Margaret passed. I was cleaning behind the mirror Victoria had asked me to dust the frame. The catch gave way when I reached around it. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I didn't know what to do, Arthur. I was afraid. I kept them in a safe place and I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for until Julian died, and you called me this morning. From downstairs, the sound of a door. Martha moved faster than I'd seen her move in years. She had the office door closed and both of us into the hallway, in the time it took for the front door to open and close downstairs. We stood flat against the wall beside the staircase, not breathing, listening to Victoria's heels cross the marble entryway below. The sound stopped. A pause. Then her footsteps moved toward the kitchen, away from the stairs. Backstairs, Martha breathed. I didn't know there were backstairs. Martha did, which was exactly the point she had made about people like Victoria not thinking about what the help might know. We went down a narrow service staircase at the rear of the house through a mudroom that smelled like potting soil and rubber boots, and out through a side door that opened onto the driveway behind a boxwood hedge. I was in the Explorer with the engine running before I allowed myself to exhale properly. Martha tapped my window. I rolled it down. I'm going back in, she said. If I disappear now, she'll notice. I'll call you tonight. She straightened her coat, smoothed her hair, and walked back around the hedge toward the front door, like a woman returning from checking the mail, unhurried and unremarkable. 64 years old, from Youngstown, built from practical Ohio material. I had not given Martha Griggs nearly enough credit. I drove back to Lakewood with Margaret's pages in my jacket pocket, and my hands very steady on the wheel. The way hands go steady when a person has moved past the point where shaking does any good. The November sky had dropped lower, the kind of flat gray ceiling that settled over Cleveland in late autumn, and didn't lift again until April, and the familiar streets of my neighborhood looked different to me now, the way places look different when you understand something new about the life you've been living in them. I sat at my kitchen table, with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, and read the pages again. All of them this time. Beginning to end. Margaret had been right. Margaret had always been careful and observant, and she had been right, and she had tried to leave me something to find. And I had lived 4 years in a house full of her things, without knowing it was there, grieving her as a natural death, telling myself that 62 was too young, but that hearts failed and there was nothing to be done about it. There was something to be done about it now. My phone rang at 2:30 in the afternoon. Number I didn't recognize, Columbus area code. Mr. Brennan. The voice was measured, professional, carrying the careful neutrality of someone accustomed to delivering difficult information for a living. I apologize for contacting you directly. I'm calling about your son's policy. I set down my coffee cup. What about it? We've had the claim under review for the past 3 weeks, Mr. Brennan. Standard procedure for accidental death claims of this value. Our actuarial threshold requires independent review for any payout above $2 million. A brief pause. I need to be straightforward with you. We've identified a number of inconsistencies in the physical evidence submitted with the claim. Our forensic consultant's findings don't align with the profile on file for your son. We're not in a position to approve the payout at this time, and we're conducting a formal investigation. What kind of inconsistencies? I said. I'm not able to share specific details over the phone, Mr. Brennan. But I would like to meet with you in person at your convenience to discuss what we've found. You may have information that's relevant to our investigation. Another pause, shorter. And there's one additional matter I should mention, since you may not be aware of it. Approximately 2 weeks after your son's funeral, a new life insurance policy was taken out, naming you as the insured. The beneficiary of that policy is your daughter-in-law, Victoria Brennan. The kitchen was very quiet. At Ohio law, a person taking out a life insurance policy on someone else had to demonstrate what was called insurable interest, a legitimate financial or personal relationship that meant the policyholder would suffer genuine loss if the insured person died. A daughter-in-law claiming insurable interest in a father-in-law was legally arguable, particularly if she could demonstrate financial dependency or caregiving responsibility. Victoria was smart enough to know that. She was smart enough to have had a lawyer structure it correctly. She had taken out a policy on my life 2 weeks after burying my son. Mr. Brennan, Cross said, are you still there? I'm here, I said. When can you meet? I can be in Columbus tomorrow. There's a diner on High Street called Thurman's, do you know it? I can find it. Noon, if that works. There's something else I should tell you before we meet, so you understand the full context of my interest in this case. A third pause, longer than the others, the kind of pause a person takes before saying something they've decided to say. Christian Hale and I were business partners 11 years ago. He made certain decisions that ended that partnership and cost me a significant amount of money, and considerably more than money. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it had changed, a current running below the professional surface. I want to be transparent with you about that history, Mr. Brennan. My investigation is legitimate, and my findings are genuine. But I am not a disinterested party, and you should know that before we sit down together. I looked at Margaret's pages on the table in front of me. At the last line in the handwriting, I would have known anywhere. Mr. Cross, I said, I'll see you at noon tomorrow, and I have some information of my own. After I hung up, I sat for a long time at the kitchen table in the quiet house. Then I picked up my phone again and called Earl. I need you in the garage tomorrow morning, I said when he answered. Early, bring your tools. All of them, Earl said. All of them, I said. Earl showed up at 6:45 in the morning with his toolbox in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, which was exactly what I'd expected, and he didn't ask me a single question about why I'd called, which was also exactly what I'd expected. That was the thing about a friendship that had been running for 24 years. You stopped needing to explain the large things. The large things communicated themselves through tone of voice and the specific hour at which a man called and the way he said all of them when you asked about the tools. We stood in the garage with the Explorer between us, and I told him what I needed. Not everything, not Margaret's pages, not Julian's video, not the full shape of what I was building toward. Just the task in front of us. I needed the vehicle wired for sound. Full cabin coverage, omnidirectional, the kind of setup that picked up a whispered conversation from the back seat as clearly as a voice from the driver's seat. I needed it routed to a transmitter small enough to fit behind the dashboard panel, with a range sufficient to reach a receiver outside the vehicle at a distance of roughly 50 feet. Earl listened with his arms crossed and his coffee cup steaming in the cold garage air. When I finished, he said, Ohio's a one-party consent state. I know. Meaning you can record anything that happens in your own vehicle without telling the other people in it. I know that too. He uncrossed his arms. All right then. Hand me the panel puller. That was Earl Simmons. 69 years old, retired after 31 years as a certified welder at a fabrication plant in Brook Park. Hands that still moved with the precision of someone who had spent 3 decades making metal do exactly what he wanted it to do. He didn't need causes explained to him. He needed tasks defined clearly, and then he needed people to get out of his way while he executed them. We worked for 3 hours. Earl handled the primary wiring while I sourced the components from an electronics supply kit I'd ordered online 2 days ago and had delivered to a neighbor's address rather than my own. 4 microphones each, no larger than a shirt button, positioned at the 4 corners of the cabin interior. A transmitter unit the size of a deck of playing cards fitted behind the center console panel, where it sat invisible against the existing wiring harness. A separate power feed running directly off the vehicle's secondary battery circuit, so the system operated independently of the main ignition. The receiver was a modified unit Earl had originally built for picking up radio frequencies from equipment at the fabrication plant repurposed now to receive the transmitter's signal and route it to a recording device the size of a paperback book. Range, I asked when we tested it in the driveway. Earl walked to the end of the block with the receiver. 60 feet, maybe 65. He held up his thumb. Good enough, I said. We went back inside, and Earl poured the last of the thermos into both our cups, and we sat on the workbench, the way we'd sat on that workbench 100 times over the years, solving problems the way men of our generation solved problems quietly, practically, without drama. Arthur, Earl said after a while. Yeah. This about what happened to Julian. It wasn't a question. I looked at my coffee cup. It's about what happened to Julian, I said. And what happened to Margaret? I stopped, corrected myself. Margaret. What happened to Margaret? Earl was quiet for a moment. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled down the street, and the garage walls shook slightly with the vibration the way they always had, the same way they'd shaken when Julian was 12 years old, and had helped me replace the garage door springs on a Saturday afternoon. In July, standing on a step stool to reach the upper bracket and handing me tools with the serious concentration of a boy who understood that this was important work and wanted to do his part of it correctly. "I'm going to Columbus today," I said. "Meet with a man who has information. When I get back, I'll have a better picture of the whole thing." And then we set a trap. I looked at the Explorer sitting in the center of the garage, the most ordinary-looking vehicle in Lakewood, Ohio, now carrying inside its panels a system that would record every word spoken within its walls. They think they already won, Earl. That's the advantage. People who think they've won stop being careful. Earl drank his coffee. He looked at the Explorer the way we both looked at finished work, checking it over one final time, making sure nothing had been missed. "Dorothy wants you to come for dinner Sunday," he said. "She made her pot roast." The ordinariness of it hit me somewhere in the sternum. Dorothy's pot roast on a Sunday. The kind of thing that had been true every month for 2 decades and would keep being true regardless of what was happening in the larger world, because some things were anchored deep enough that nothing could shake them loose. "Tell her I'll be there," I said. Earl stood up, rinsed his cup in the utility sink, and picked up his toolbox. At the garage door, he stopped and turned back. "Arthur, whatever it is you're building toward." He looked at the Explorer one more time. "Don't do it alone. You call me when it's time." "I will," I said. He walked back across the yard to his own house, and I stood in the garage with the finished vehicle and the morning light coming in gray and flat through the high windows. And I thought about Julian sitting in his real car in that Parma warehouse watching Victoria walk toward a blue sedan at the curb. And I thought about Margaret at her kitchen table, writing careful letters in handwriting formed by nuns in 1962. And I thought about the 4 microphones sitting invisible in the corners of this cabin, waiting to hear the truth spoken out loud by people who believed they were speaking to a dead man. I had one more call to make before Columbus. I dialed Deputy Frank Kowalski. He picked up on the second ring. "Frank," I said, "I need to tell you something. All of it. And then I need to ask you for a favor that's going to require you to trust me before you understand the whole picture." The performance required preparation. Not the technical kind. Martha had sourced the antidote 2 days earlier through a pharmacist friend in Youngstown, a mild activated charcoal compound that would neutralize whatever Victoria intended to introduce into a beverage without leaving any trace in my system. That part was handled. What required preparation was the acting, and I had never been an actor in my life. I sat at my kitchen table the morning of and practiced looking unwell. It turned out not to require much practice. 6 weeks of genuine grief had done most of the work already. I was thinner than I'd been in years, the circles under my eyes were real, and when I moved around the house, I moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who had been spending too much time alone with difficult thoughts. All I had to add was a slight tremor in my right hand and a tendency to pause mid-sentence as though I'd lost the thread. I called Victoria at 10 in the morning. "Victoria," I said, letting my voice come out rough and uncertain. "I'm sorry to bother you. I've been having these dizzy spells since yesterday. I didn't want to make a fuss, but this morning I couldn't get out of the kitchen chair for almost 20 minutes. Her response was immediate and precisely calibrated. "Arthur, why didn't you call me sooner? That sounds serious. Have you eaten today?" "A little. I'm probably just run down." I let a pause stretch out. "I didn't want to worry you. You're not a bother at all. Let me call Christian Dr. Hale. He does house calls for family. He can be there within the hour." There it was. The offer coming before I'd asked for it, so natural and so immediate that someone who didn't know better would have found it touching. I knew better. That would be kind of you, I said. Thank you, Victoria. I hung up and sat back and waited. Hale arrived at 11:47. I watched through the front window as he parked his dark blue sedan at the curb, the same sedan from Julian's dashcam footage, the same vehicle that had pulled up outside the Shaker Heights house while my son watched from the driver's seat. He came up the front walk in his overcoat medical bag in hand, moving with the easy confidence of a man who considered himself the solution to whatever problem he was walking toward. I was already in the armchair when I heard his knock positioned, the way a man positions himself when getting up from a chair has become an effort. "Come in," I called. "It's unlocked." He let himself in and stood in my living room doorway, taking in the space with the quick, professional assessment of someone cataloging an environment. His eyes moved across the room, the bookshelves, the family photographs, the old upright piano Margaret had played every Sunday evening, and his expression held the particular variety of polite concern that had nothing behind it. "Mr. Brennan," he said. "Christian Hale. Victoria asked me to look in on you. Dr. Hale?" I reached up to shake his hand from the chair, letting the movement cost me visibly. "I appreciate you coming all this way." "Not at all." He set his bag on the coffee table and went through the standard motions: blood pressure cuff, pulse check, small pen light in the eyes. His hands were steady and practiced, and told me nothing about the man attached to them that I didn't already know. "How long have the dizzy spells been occurring?" he asked, making notes on a small pad. 3 or 4 days. Gets worse when I stand up too fast." I let my voice carry the texture of a man talking through fatigue. "I've been sleeping poorly. A lot on my mind." "Understandable given your loss." He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed, the words technically correct, the underlying frequency hollow. "I'm going to recommend some blood work. Nothing alarming, just baseline panels for someone your age experiencing these symptoms." He repacked his bag. I let my eyes drift toward the window and stay there the way eyes drift when a person is running low on energy for conversation. After a moment, I let my head tip slightly to the side, my breathing slow and deepen. Hale went still. He watched me for 10 full seconds. Then he reached into his coat pocket and took out his phone. "It's me," he said when Victoria answered. His voice had changed entirely. The professional warmth was gone, replaced by something flatter and more transactional. "He's out. Went under faster than I expected, honestly. The old ones usually do when they're already run down." Victoria said something I couldn't make out. "The blood work excuse will cover the visit." I told him I'd send orders to his pharmacy. A pause while she spoke again. "No, there's nothing here yet. He hasn't done anything unusual that I can see. Couple of old photographs, some books." Another pause longer. "Victoria, stop worrying. He's a 68-year-old retired mechanic who thinks his son died in a car accident. He has no idea. He's not a threat to anything." He walked to the window while he talked, standing with his back to me, looking out at the street. He had switched to speaker, the small flat voice of Victoria's replies audible across the quiet room. "The timing on the other matter, I agree sooner is better. The insurance company is asking questions, and the longer the policy sits without a claim event, the more it looks like what it is." His voice dropped lower. "Let me think about the logistics. We want it to look consistent with his age and health history. The dizzy spells actually help us establishes a documented medical pattern." I lay in the armchair with my eyes 9/10 closed and my breathing even and my heart rate doing things that had nothing to do with dizziness, and I listened to a man discuss the logistics of my death from 6 feet away. The 4 microphones in the Explorer outside were not recording this conversation. They didn't need to be. Deputy Frank Kowalski was parked at the end of Maple Avenue in an unmarked car with the receiver Earl had built, and every word Dr. Christian Hale was speaking into his phone was traveling through the walls of my house to the small antenna I'd installed above the living room window frame 3 days ago, routed to a recorder that Kowalski had running in the passenger seat. Ohio, one-party consent state. My vehicle, my home, my rules. Hale finished his call and came back to check my pulse one more time with 2 fingers at my wrist. His touch was clinical and completely indifferent. "Sleep it off, old man," he said quietly to no one in particular. Then he picked up his bag and let himself out. I sat in the armchair and listened to his sedan start and pull away from the curb, and then I sat for another full minute, just breathing, and then I reached into my shirt pocket and turned off the secondary recorder I'd had running against my chest the entire time. 2 recordings, belt and suspenders. The way you approach any repair job where failure is not an option. I picked up my phone and sent Kowalski a single text message. "Did you get it?" His reply came back in under a minute. Every word. "Come by the station tomorrow. We need to talk about next steps." I set the phone down and looked at the family photographs on the bookshelf across the room. Julian, at his MIT graduation, 22 years old, holding his diploma with both hands, and grinning like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Margaret standing beside him, her hand on his arm, looking not at the camera, but at her son with an expression that had no name in any language I knew. "We're getting there," I said to the room. I left Lakewood at 9 in the morning and took I-71 south toward Columbus, 2.5 hours of Ohio interstate that gave me nothing to look at except flat farmland and highway signs, and my own thoughts, which were company enough. Kowalski had been thorough the previous evening. We'd sat in his office at the District 3 station for 90 minutes while he walked me through what the recording captured, not just Hale's words, but the specific language, the specific phrases that a prosecutor could work with. The other matter. Consistent with his age and health history. The timing sooner is better. Kowalski had 23 years on the force, and he knew the difference between evidence that suggested and evidence that convicted, and he told me straight that what we had was strong but not yet complete. "We need them to say it plainly," he said. "No room for interpretation. No lawyer standing up in court arguing that his client was speaking hypothetically about a different old man." He was right, which meant we needed one more step after cross. Thurman's Cafe on High Street was the kind of Columbus institution that had been feeding the same families for 3 generations, checkered floor red vinyl booths, coffee that came in ceramic mugs without anyone asking whether you wanted it. I arrived 11 minutes early and took a booth in the back corner, with a clear sight line to the door, the way a man sits when he's learned in the past several weeks to notice who enters a room before they notice him. Raymond Cross walked in at noon exactly. He was 58 years old, medium height, with the lean build of someone who had spent decades moving through the world on careful terms. His hair was gray and cut close, his coat was good quality, but not expensive, and his eyes did the same quick room assessment Hale's had done in my living room, except Cross's assessment was faster and landed on me immediately without the exploratory sweep, which told me he'd already identified my position before he came through the door. We shook hands across the table. His grip was firm and brief. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for making the drive." "Raymond Cross," I said. "You look like a man who hasn't slept well in about 11 years. Something shifted in his expression, not offense, more like recognition. He sat down and flagged the server for coffee before he said anything else. "That's a fair assessment," he said, "though it's gotten considerably worse in the past 6 weeks." The server filled our mugs and left us alone. Cross opened a slim folder on the table between us, organized, tabbed the work product of someone who understood that how you presented information was as important as what the information contained. Our forensic consultant examined the physical evidence submitted with the accidental death claim. He began. The biological material recovered from the accident scene does not match the profile on file for your son. Blood typing is inconsistent. Dental records were submitted, but our consultant identified anomalies in the root structure that suggest the records themselves may have been altered or substituted. He turned a page. Additionally, the vehicle identification number on the recovered chassis corresponds to your son's registered Explorer, but the chassis itself shows manufacturing characteristics consistent with a vehicle produced approximately 14 months earlier than the registered model year. I looked at the documents without touching them. In plain language, I said. In plain language, the body in that car was not your son, the records were manipulated, and the vehicle that burned was not the vehicle registered to Julian Brennan. Cross held my gaze steadily. Which raises the question of where your son actually is, Mr. Brennan. A question I notice you haven't asked me yet, which is interesting. He was sharp. Sharper than I'd expected, and I'd expected sharp. I have information of my own, I said. Some of which I'm not ready to share until I understand exactly where your investigation ends and your personal interest begins. Cross wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. Outside on High Street, a bus went past, rattling the window glass in its frame. 11 years ago, he said, Christian Hale and I co-founded a medical technology consulting firm in Columbus. We had a good practice: hospital systems, insurance carriers, pharmaceutical companies. Hale had the medical credentials and the client relationships. I had the investigative and analytical infrastructure. A pause. 3 years in, I discovered Hale had been billing clients for services we hadn't provided and routing the payments through a subsidiary entity I hadn't known existed. By the time I understood the full scope of it, the firm was dissolved. My professional reputation had taken damage that took 4 years to repair, and Hale had walked away with approximately $800,000 that should have been split between us. You reported it. I reported it. The civil case settled for an amount that didn't cover my actual losses and came with a non-disclosure agreement that Hale's lawyers made sure had teeth. His jaw tightened briefly, the first visible crack in the professional surface. I've been waiting 11 years for Christian Hale to do something sufficiently serious that a non-disclosure agreement became irrelevant. Insurance fraud and conspiracy charges tend to have that effect. I looked at this man across a table in a Columbus diner and made the calculation I'd been preparing to make since he called me 5 days ago. He had a personal motive. He also had genuine evidence, genuine professional standing, and the specific quality of honesty that comes from a person who knows their own bias and names it before you can use it against them. My son is alive, I said. Cross didn't move, didn't blink, just held my gaze across the table while the information landed and settled. He staged the accident himself, I continued. He discovered what they were planning before they could carry it out. He's been in a safe location for 6 weeks, and he has documentation that goes considerably beyond what your forensic consultant found. I picked up my coffee mug. He's the reason you can't approve that insurance claim, Mr. Cross. And he's the reason we're going to be able to finish this properly instead of just making it complicated for them. Cross was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I need to meet him. Not yet, I said. Not until the last piece is in place. What's the last piece? I set down my mug. I'm going to invite Victoria and Hale to dinner at my house, I said. And I'm going to give them the opportunity to say out loud, in a room wired for sound, with a police officer outside, exactly what they did and exactly what they were planning to do next. I looked at him steadily. When that's done, you'll have everything you need for the insurance fraud case. Kowalski will have everything he needs for the criminal case. And my son can come home. Cross studied me across the table for a long moment. You're 68 years old, he said finally. I am. And you spent 40 years as a mechanic. I did. He almost smiled. Mr. Brennan, I've worked with federal investigators, corporate attorneys, and 2 former district attorneys. I have never had someone walk into a meeting with me and already have a better plan than mine. My son built his trap in advance, I said. I'm just finishing the installation. The 2 days between Columbus and the dinner were the quietest days I'd had in weeks, which was strange because they were also the most deliberate. Kowalski came to the house the morning after I returned from Columbus. He sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, and we went through the plan. The way I used to go through a complex repair job before touching a single tool, identifying every step, every potential failure point, every contingency that needed a contingency. He'd spoken with the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office the previous afternoon, carefully, and without names, laying out a hypothetical scenario that the prosecutor had found sufficiently interesting to assign a junior attorney to monitor. We need them to make explicit statements, Kowalski said, underlining something on his pad. The recording from your living room gives us intent and planning. What we need from the dinner is admission, them saying clearly what they did, not just what they were going to do. They'll say it, I said. When they think I'm gone, they won't be careful. Hale proved that in my living room. Kowalski nodded slowly. I'll have 2 officers in an unmarked vehicle on Maple Avenue. Cross will be in a separate car on the cross street. The moment we have what we need on the recording, I come through the front door. He paused. Arthur, I need to ask you something directly. The recording in the living room, Hale discussed future plans. If Victoria brings something to the dinner, something she intends to put in your drink. Martha is handling that, I said. He looked at me. Martha sourced a compound from a pharmacist in Youngstown, I said. Activated charcoal preparation. I take it an hour before they arrive. Whatever Victoria brings with her won't have the effect she's planning on. I held his gaze. I've thought this through, Frank. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you've been thinking like a cop for 6 weeks without realizing it. I've been thinking like a mechanic, I said. Same principles. Understand the system, anticipate the failure points, build in redundancy. Martha arrived that afternoon with a small glass bottle in a paper bag, the kind of plain brown bag a pharmacist uses for compound preparations. She set it on the kitchen counter and looked at me with the expression she'd been wearing since the warehouse in Parma, something between determination and a grief she was managing carefully, 1 hour at a time. You take the full dose 1 hour before they arrive, she said. Not 30 minutes, 1 hour. And you drink water with it, not coffee. It binds faster with water. I understand. And Arthur? She put her hand on my arm. If anything feels wrong tomorrow night, if the timing goes off or something unexpected happens, you have 3 people outside that door. You will not be alone in that house. I know, I said. Thank you, Martha. She almost smiled. Tomorrow night, she said, we finish this. Earl stopped by in the late afternoon, ostensibly to return a socket set he'd borrowed 3 weeks ago, actually to stand in the garage for 20 minutes and satisfy himself that the Explorer's system was still functioning correctly. He tested the transmitter with his receiver, walked to the end of the block, and back gave me a thumbs up from the sidewalk, and left without making a production of any of it. That was the 4th time in 6 weeks that Earl Simmons had shown up at exactly the moment I needed someone to show up, done exactly what needed doing, and then gone home to Dorothy and her pot roast and her Tuesday evening television programs, as though none of it was remarkable. I called Victoria at 7 o'clock that evening. I had been sitting at the kitchen table for 20 minutes beforehand, not rehearsing exactly, just settling, getting my voice to the right place. The voice of a man who was tired and old and had been carrying grief for 6 weeks and had arrived somewhere that looked like acceptance, even if it wasn't. She answered on the second ring. Arthur, is everything all right? Everything's fine, Victoria. I let a small pause sit there, the kind of pause that carries weight without explaining it. I've been doing a lot of thinking since I got back from Columbus. About the future. About what makes sense at my age going forward. That sounds healthy, she said carefully. What kind of thinking? About the Millbrook property. The Millbrook property, there was a 12-acre parcel in Geauga County that my father had bought in 1951 and that had passed to me when he died, and that I had never sold because selling it had always felt like selling something that wasn't entirely mine to sell. Victoria knew about it. I had mentioned it once 2 years ago at a family dinner, and I had watched her file the information away behind her eyes, the way she filed everything away. It's been sitting empty for 30 years. I'm 68 years old, and my knees don't work the way they used to. It doesn't make sense for me to hold on to it. A beat of silence on her end. Brief, but there. Arthur, you don't have to. I want to, I said. I want to do it properly with a notary, with everything signed and recorded. I thought maybe we could have dinner tomorrow evening. 7 o'clock. Just the two of us, or bring Christian if you like. I know you've been leaning on him for support, and I think that's fine, Victoria. Grief makes people need people. I paused. I made a pot roast this afternoon. Dorothy Simmons gave me her recipe years ago. I thought it would be nice to cook a real meal for once. The silence this time was longer. 4 full seconds, which was enough time for a careful person to think through implications and arrive at conclusions and decide how to respond to them. That sounds lovely, Arthur, Victoria said. Her voice had warmed by several degrees. I'll ask Christian. I'm sure he'd be glad to come. 7 o'clock then. And Victoria, I let my voice soften into something that cost me considerably more than I showed. Bring something if you like. Whatever you'd normally bring to a dinner. I want it to feel like a real family evening. Of course, she said. We'll bring wine. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, without moving. The house was quiet around me, the particular quiet of a November evening in Lakewood, when the wind had dropped and the street outside had gone still. Margaret's piano stood against the living room wall in the dark beyond the kitchen doorway. She had played it every Sunday evening for 31 years in this house hymns, mostly the kind she'd grown up with in her parents' home in Parma, and sometimes I still heard it in the quiet moments, the way you hear things that have been absorbed into the walls of a place over decades of repetition. I looked at the kitchen counter where the small brown paper bag sat, and at the family photograph on the refrigerator door. Julian, at 12 years old, standing on a step stool in this very garage, handing me a wrench with the serious expression of a boy who understood the weight of useful work. Tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, the people who had taken my wife and tried to take my son and were planning to take me would walk through my front door, expecting to finish what they had started. I picked up my phone and sent a single message to Kowalski. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. She said yes. I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I slept through the night without waking. I took the compound at 6 o'clock, exactly 1 hour before they were due to arrive. Martha had called at 5:30 to make sure I remembered, which I did. But I didn't tell her that because she needed to call, and I understood that. She'd offered 3 times to be present at the dinner, and 3 times I'd told her no. This room needed to feel like what Victoria expected it to feel like. An old man's house, a quiet evening, a tired widower who had run out of reasons to hold on to things. A third person at the table changed that equation. I washed the compound down with a full glass of water, the way Martha had told me to, standing at the kitchen sink, looking out the window at the backyard, where the November grass had gone brown and flat. The compound had almost no taste, just a faint chalky quality that faded within a minute. Then I finished cooking. Dorothy Simmons's pot roast recipe required 4 hours and a cast-iron Dutch oven, and the particular patience of a person who understood that good things happened slowly and couldn't be rushed without being ruined. I'd started it at 2 in the afternoon, and by 6, the whole house smelled the way houses smelled when Margaret was alive, and Sunday evenings were still a thing that happened here. Pot roast and warm bread and the radiators ticking in the walls against the cold outside. I set the table for 3. At 6:55, I heard a car on Maple Avenue slow and park. I moved to the front window and looked out. Dark blue sedan at the curb, Hale's vehicle. Victoria got out of the passenger side in a dark coat, a bottle of wine in the crook of her arm. Hale came around from the driver's side, hands in his overcoat pockets, scanning the street once in each direction, with the quick, habitual assessment of a man who had learned to account for his surroundings. He looked directly at the window where I was standing. I stepped back, then made myself step forward again. An old man looking out his front window for expected dinner guests. Nothing suspicious about that. I raised a hand in acknowledgement and watched his expression arrange itself into a smile. I went to open the front door. "Arthur?" Victoria stepped forward and kissed my cheek the way she always had, the gesture that had always seemed warm, and now felt like a performance I understood the staging of. She smelled of expensive perfume and the cold November air. "Something smells wonderful." "Dorothy Simmons's pot roast," Ojai said. "Come in, both of you. It's cold out there." "Your house call helped," I said, and watched nothing move in his face at all. We settled into the ritual of a dinner. Victoria opened the wine and poured 3 glasses. Hale sat at the table the way he sat everywhere, with his back to the wall facing the room, the automatic positioning of a man who always wanted to see what was coming. I brought the pot roast out from the kitchen, and the bread and the green beans I'd cooked with bacon, the way my mother used to make them. And for a while the 3 of us moved through the ordinary choreography of a shared meal, passing dishes, commenting on the food, finding the surface-level conversation that people find when they are all pretending this is something it is not. "The Millbrook property," Victoria said, after the first course, setting down her fork with the careful timing of someone who had been waiting for the right moment to arrive. 12 acres in Geauga County, you said. "My father bought it in '51, I said. "Never built on it. Good land, but I'm not a farming man, and my knees have been telling me for 3 years that I'm done pretending otherwise." I pushed my plate forward slightly, the gesture of a man winding down. "It should stay in the family. Julian would have wanted that." Victoria's expression did something subtle and controlled at Julian's name. Hale reached for his wine glass. "That's very generous, Arthur," Victoria said. "Family is family," I said. The wine was a red. I didn't know a Cabernet from a Napa vineyard whose label I didn't recognize, and it was very good, which seemed right, somehow the best wine I'd likely ever drink in this kitchen, brought by the people who intended it to be the last thing I tasted, in any meaningful sense. At the end of the main course, Victoria rose to help clear the plates. In the kitchen, I heard her moving around, heard the particular sound of her opening and closing things, the kind of sound that could be a person tidying up, or could be something else entirely. She came back to the table with a small pot of tea on a tray, 2 cups, the kind of domestic gesture that looked like thoughtfulness. "I made tea," she said. "I know you prefer it after dinner, Arthur. You mentioned it once, months ago." I had mentioned it, once. That she had remembered it and brought what she needed to act on the memory told me everything about how long this particular plan had been in development. "That's kind of you," I said. She poured my cup herself. Her hands were steady and unhurried, and she set the cup in front of me with a small smile that reached all the way to her eyes for the first time that evening. Hale watched from across the table without moving. I looked at the cup of tea in front of me. The steam rose from it in a thin thread, and the smell was Earl Grey, which was what Margaret had drunk, which was what Victoria had brought to Margaret in the weeks before she died. And the fact that she had chosen the same variety struck me as either a profound carelessness or something worse. I picked up the cup with both hands. Victoria leaned back slightly in her chair. I drank. Not all of it. Half the cup, the way a man drinks tea at the end of a long meal, unhurried, setting the cup down with a small sound on the saucer. The compound had been in my system for over an hour. Whatever was in the tea had nothing to arrive to. But they didn't know that. I let the silence run for 90 seconds. Then I set both hands flat on the table and looked at them as though I was having difficulty focusing. Victoria and Hale exchanged the briefest look across the table, a microsecond of communication. So practiced, it was almost invisible. Almost. I feel a bit. I started, then stopped. Let my shoulders drop. Let my head lower slowly toward my chest, the way a man's head lowers when the lights are going out. My left hand slipped off the table edge. The sound of it hitting the chair arm was loud in the quiet room. Victoria stood up. Before I reveal the burning confrontation and the exact moment this heartless betrayal is completely unmasked, please comment the number 88 below so I know you are still here with me. And please note the upcoming plot includes some fictional elements for entertainment. If this isn't the type of content you want to hear, you can turn off the video right here. Victoria came around the table quickly. Not running, that wasn't her style, and even now, even in this moment, her style held. She moved with the contained urgency of someone managing a situation, rather than reacting to one checking the door to the street first, with a glance before she crossed the room, the automatic caution of a person who had learned to account for witnesses before she accounted for anything else. She crouched beside my chair and put 2 fingers at my wrist. I kept my breathing slow and shallow, the way breathing goes when a person is deeply under. My eyes were 9/10 closed, just enough gap to catch light and movement without giving myself away. I could smell her perfume and the wine on her breath, and underneath both of those, the faint, clean smell of the Earl Grey still in the pot on the table. "He's out," she said. Haley was already on his feet. He came around to my other side, checked my pulse the same way he had in this same room 10 days ago, 2 fingers at the inside of my wrist, clinical and efficient. "Stronger than I'd like," he said quietly. "But it'll do. Give it 20 minutes. Victoria straightened up. She looked at me in the chair, really looked at me, the way she had never looked at me across a dinner table in all the years she had been part of this family. Without the performance of warmth, without the careful arrangement of her expression into something designed to be seen. Just a woman looking at an obstacle that was almost finished being an obstacle. 20 minutes, she said. Then we call it in. Hale moved to the window and looked out at Maple Avenue. 1 beat 2. Then he stepped back. Clear, he said. He walked to the armchair against the far wall, my chair, the one I'd sat in every evening for 20 years. The one Margaret had reupholstered in 1998, with fabric she'd ordered from a catalog, and spent 3 weekends fitting herself, and he sat down in it, with his long legs stretched out in front of him, and he looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man waiting for a flight in an airport lounge. So, he said, Geauga County. Victoria almost laughed. It came out as a breath through her nose, sharp and satisfied. 12 acres. Good timing on his part, actually. The Millbrook property wasn't in Julian's estate. It was always Arthur's separately held asset. I couldn't have gotten to it any other way. Worth much. Agricultural land in Geauga County runs about $8,000 to $12,000 an acre, depending on drainage. So somewhere between 96 and 144,000. She picked up her wineglass from the table and swirled it. Not life-changing, but it closes the ledger neatly. Hale made a sound of mild agreement. The insurance investigation is still the loose thread. Cross. Victoria said the name with the particular flatness of someone disposing of a category rather than a person. He's been sniffing around the claim for 6 weeks. I had my attorney send a letter last Thursday. Procedural obstruction delays the formal denial by 60 days minimum. And if he's already shared his findings externally, then we deal with it externally. She set the wine glass down. Christian, we have the recordings from his living room visit. We have documentation of his mental and physical decline going back 4 months. A 68-year-old grieving widower who had been experiencing documented dizzy spells and was found deceased in his home after a quiet dinner. No one looks hard at that. No one who matters. I lay in the chair with my eyes 9/10 closed and heard myself described as a category, as a loose thread, as something to be dealt with. And I felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but was composed of equal parts, of both the way alloys are composed, forged under pressure, into something harder than either original material. Hale leaned forward in the armchair. The algorithm writes, he said. Tell me again how the transfer works once probate clears. Victoria turned and leaned against the dining table, arms crossed, at settling into the explanation with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it many times. Julian's algorithm patents were held through a Delaware shell entity he established 3 years ago for liability purposes. The beneficial ownership transfers to me as sole heir under the will. Once Arthur's estate clears probate, which given the simplicity of his holdings should take 60 to 90 days, the Millbrook property adds to the total. Combined with the algorithm royalties currently in escrow, we're looking at somewhere between 31 and 34 million over the next 7 years. And the insurance payout. When Cross's obstruction runs out and the denial comes through formally, we file suit. The anomalies in the forensic report are explainable. We have an expert prepared to testify to contamination in the evidence collection process. She picked up the wine glass again. Julian's death was an accident. Arthur's death will be natural. Raymond Cross is a disgruntled former business associate with a documented personal grievance against you. The insurance company's case falls apart in discovery. She paused. We've been careful, Christian. From the beginning, we have been careful. Hale looked at the ceiling again. Margaret wasn't careful enough, though, he said. The tea, the journals. Victoria went very still. Something shifted in the room. A temperature change, almost physical, the way the air changes in a space when the thing that has been unspoken finally gets spoken. Margaret figured it out, Victoria said after a moment. Her voice was quiet and entirely flat. Toward the end, she started disposing of the tea instead of drinking it. By then it didn't matter, the cumulative effect was already sufficient. But yes. She set the wine glass down for the last time. Margaret was more observant than I gave her credit for. I underestimated her. I had been still for 11 minutes. I had lain in this chair and listened to the price assigned to my wife's life, to my son's life, to my own. And I had not moved, and I had not made a sound. And the reason I had not moved and had not made a sound was that I had known from the first moment Earl and I sat in this garage wiring that vehicle, that the moment I moved was the moment this ended, and it could not end 1 second before it was complete. It was complete now. I opened my eyes. Not slowly, I had been still long enough, and the time for performance was finished. I sat up straight in the dining chair and looked across the table at Victoria, who had gone the color of the wall behind her, and then at Hale in my armchair, who had come forward off the backrest with a sudden rigidity, like a man who has just put his hand on something he did not expect to find there. Victoria, I said. My voice came out level and clear. Christian. Neither of them spoke. "You mentioned Margaret's journals," I said. "I want you to know that I found them 3 weeks ago behind the mirror in your office." I looked at Victoria steadily. She saved them for me. She knew I'd know what to do. From the small device mounted above the living room window, the secondary transmitter I had installed 4 days ago, the one feeding directly to Kowalski's receiver on Maple Avenue. Every word spoken in this room for the past 11 minutes had been traveling through the November air to a recording device in an unmarked car 60 feet away. Outside, I heard a car door open, then another. Victoria turned her head toward the front window, and the expression on her face in that moment, the specific collapse of a carefully constructed architecture falling all at once, was something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Not with satisfaction. With something older and quieter than satisfaction. With the understanding that some things once broken could not be put back together, and that this was not always a tragedy. The front door opened, and Deputy Frank Kowalski stepped into my living room. Kowalski filled the doorway the way he always filled doorways, not with size exactly, though he was a large man, but with the particular quality of presence that 23 years of wearing a badge in Cuyahoga County had built into his posture. Behind him, I could see 2 uniformed officers on the front porch, and beyond them the cold dark of Maple Avenue and the shapes of neighbors who had come to their doors and windows, drawn by the sound of official vehicles arriving on a quiet residential street. Hale stood up from my armchair. "Deputy Kowalski," he said. His voice was steady and professional and completely hollow. "I'm not sure what you think you heard, but I'd recommend you speak with my attorney before Christian Hale." Kowalski said, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to cause harm to a person, and related charges under Ohio Revised Code. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The Miranda warning continued clean and procedural, each word landing in the quiet room, with the particular weight of language that means exactly what it says, and nothing more or less. Hale listened with his jaw set, and his hands at his sides, and his face doing the controlled collapse of a man deciding in real time how much dignity he could preserve from a situation that had none left to offer. He didn't resist. Officer Reyes came through the door, and Hale went with her without a word, which was the smartest decision he had made in this house all evening. The handcuffs clicked into place in the hallway, and the sound of it carried through the whole first floor of the house the way sounds carry in spaces that have gone completely still. Victoria had not moved from her position against the dining table. She stood with both hands gripping the table edge behind her, watching Hale walk out with the expression of a person watching the last support structure of something large and complicated being removed. Then she looked at me. I had stood up from the dining chair. I was standing between her and the living room doorway, which she registered in the same instant I registered that she was registering it. "Arthur," she said. Her voice had lost every manufactured quality. What was left underneath was something I recognized as genuine for the first time, not warmth. Not warmth had never been genuine, but a stripped-down directness that was almost more unsettling than the performance had been. "You have to understand that none of this was, Victoria," I said quietly. "Don't." She looked at me for one long moment. Then she moved. Not toward me, she was too controlled for that, too precise in her spatial awareness even now. She went right away from the dining table and toward the kitchen, moving fast through the kitchen door and across the mudroom in the time it took Kowalski to reach the dining room entrance. I heard the side door open, and the cold night air came into the house in a brief rush. Kowalski was already on his radio. I walked to the front window and looked out at Maple Avenue. The Explorer was parked at the curb, where it had been parked since this afternoon, when I'd moved it out of the garage, and left it there as naturally as a man leaves a vehicle he intends to use tomorrow. Victoria came around the side of the house at a near run, reaching into her coat pocket as she crossed the front yard. She had a key. She had taken it from the hook inside the front door when she arrived. I had put it there for her. She got into the Explorer, pulled the door shut, and I heard the engine turn over, clean and strong. The headlights came on. She pulled away from the curb and accelerated north on Maple Avenue taillights, disappearing around the corner at a speed that confirmed she had a destination in mind, or believed she did. Kowalski came to stand beside me at the window. "She took the bait," he said. "She took the car," I said. Those were two different statements, and we both understood them to be two different statements, and neither of us said anything further because there was nothing further that needed saying. Earl appeared on my front porch. He had been across the street the whole time, sitting in his truck with the receiver unit and a thermos of coffee, watching. He came in through the front door with his hands in his coat pockets and stood in my living room looking at the dinner table, the three place settings, the empty wine glasses, the pot of Earl Grey still on the tray. "Done," he said. "Almost," I said. "Julian's part starts now." Martha arrived 4 minutes later, coming through the front door, without knocking, the way she had been coming through doors in this family's life for 19 years. She looked at the table, at the tea tray, at the handcuffs mark on the hallway wall, where Hale had been detained. "Is Arthur all right?" She asked Kowalski directly, the way she had always bypassed intermediaries when she wanted a straight answer. "Tell him to follow the Explorer," I said. Cross had been briefed 2 days ago on the GPS system. Julian had installed the override protocol, the destination lock, the specific conditions under which it activated. He understood what he was about to watch happen, and he understood what it meant for his insurance investigation. He had asked me that afternoon over the phone whether I felt comfortable using his personal grievance against Hale as part of a legal strategy. I had told him that his personal grievance and the T. Margaret happened to be pointing in the same direction, and that the law didn't require motivations to be pure, only evidence to be sound. He had been quiet for a moment, and then said, "Your son is a remarkable engineer, Mr. Brennan." "He had a good teacher," I'd said, and meant it only partly about engineering. The neighbors were gathering on the sidewalk, now Mrs. Patricia Dunbar from next door, in her coat thrown over her nightgown. The Okafor family, from the end of the block, 3 or 4 others, whose faces I knew from 20 years of living on this street. They stood in the cold November air, looking at the official vehicles and the lit-up windows of my house with the particular expression of people who sense that something significant has happened in a place they know well. Kowalski stepped out onto the porch to speak with them. I heard his voice calm and professional, offering the minimum necessary information in the way that good officers managed public presence at active scenes. I stayed in the doorway. Earl came to stand beside me. "The GPS activated the moment she turned the ignition," he said quietly. "I watched it on the receiver. She went north on Maple, turned east on Detroit Avenue. The system will have her on the most direct route to District 3 within 30 seconds of that turn." "I know," I said. "Julian tested it. 3 times," I said. "From 3 different starting points in the Cleveland metro area. It worked every time." Earl was quiet for a moment. "Arthur," he said. "Yeah, your boy built something extraordinary." I looked out at Maple Avenue, at the place where the Explorer's taillights had disappeared around the corner, carrying inside it a woman who had spent 4 years dismantling my family, piece by piece, now riding in a vehicle built by the son she had tried to erase, being delivered by his work to the place where his work would finish her. "He did," I said. "He learned from the best he had available." Earl made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Warren," he said, "you are the most modest man in Lakewood, Ohio." From somewhere in the city, carried faint and thin on the cold November air, I heard a siren beginning. Kowalski drove, and I sat in the passenger seat of his unmarked car, and we followed the Explorer's taillights through the nighttime streets of Cleveland, without either of us saying very much. There was nothing much to say. The thing was in motion now. It had been in motion since Julian sat in a warehouse in Parma and recorded a message to his father on a tablet. And in a more fundamental sense, it had been in motion since a 68-year-old retired mechanic had sat in his garage on a gray November morning and noticed that his dead son's GPS had something to tell him. The Explorer moved through traffic normally for the first 4 blocks. Then, at the intersection of Detroit Avenue and West 58th Street, it slowed at the green light. Kowalski watched it. "There it is," he said quietly. The Explorer sat at the green light for 3 full seconds, while the cars behind it waited. Then it moved forward, but not in the direction Victoria had been heading. It drifted right deliberately smoothly, with the unhurried precision of a system that knew exactly where it was going and was not interested in shortcuts. "She's fighting it," Kowalski said. "She won't win," I said. Through the rear window of the Explorer, I could see Victoria's silhouette, both hands on the wheel, shoulders forward, the body language of a person applying force to something that was not responding to force. The vehicle continued east on Detroit Avenue, matching the speed of surrounding traffic, stopping at red lights, signaling lane changes, with the automatic courtesy of Julian's programming, completely indifferent to the person sitting in the driver's seat. Raymond Cross's sedan appeared in my side mirror 2 cars back. We followed for 11 minutes. The Explorer turned south on West 25th Street, then east on Lorraine Avenue, working its way methodically toward the 3rd District station on Fulton Road. Julian had mapped the most direct legal route, obeying every traffic signal, every posted speed limit, every lane restriction, with the careful thoroughness of an engineer who understood that the last thing this vehicle needed was to give a defense attorney anything to work with. Kowalski's radio crackled. "Copy," Kowalski said. I looked at the Explorer ahead of us. At the taillights Julian had looked at in his rearview mirror 1,000 times driving to and from the house in Shaker Heights. At the vehicle, he had spent weeks preparing loading with contingencies and fail-safes. The way a careful engineer loads a system, not because he expected every contingency to be needed, but because he understood that the ones you didn't prepare for were the ones that ended you. He had prepared for this one. The 3rd District station on Fulton Road was a low brick building set back from the street behind a parking lot. As we turned into the lot, I could see 4 officers standing outside the main entrance, called out by whatever Kowalski had relayed ahead. The Explorer pulled into the parking lot at exactly the posted speed limit and came to a smooth stop in the space nearest the entrance. Engine idling doors, locked hazard lights blinking with the patient rhythm of a vehicle that had completed its assigned task and was waiting for further instructions. Victoria's silhouette was completely still inside. Kowalski parked, and we walked across the lot together. He nodded to the officers at the entrance, and one of them moved to the Explorer's driver door. The door opened from outside. Victoria stepped out. She looked at the station entrance. She looked at Kowalski. She looked at me, standing in the parking lot of the 3rd District station, in my good suit, the one Margaret had bought me 12 years ago. The one I'd worn to the reading of a will 6 weeks ago, when a woman had pressed a set of car keys into my palm and told me the car was old, just like me. She didn't say anything. I didn't either. The officers walked her inside, and she went with the particular stillness of a person who has finally run out of calculations to make. Cross pulled in beside us and got out of his car. He stood looking at the station entrance for a moment, hands in his coat pockets. The expression on his face something I couldn't entirely read. Not triumph, not satisfaction, exactly, more like the specific release of a tension that had been held for so long it had become structural. 11 years, he said. I know, I said. The automatic doors of the station closed behind Victoria, and the parking lot went quiet, except for the sound of the Explorer's hazard lights ticking in the cold November air, steady and patient, the last piece of Julian's work finishing itself out. Then the station doors opened again, and a young woman came out. Late 20s, dark coat, laptop bag over one shoulder, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who had been waiting inside for exactly this moment to arrive. She stopped in front of me and extended her hand. Her voice was steady and direct, the voice of someone accustomed to presenting technical information under pressure. "He sent me a data package 6 weeks ago, the night before he disappeared." She glanced at the Explorer still sitting in the parking lot, with its hazard lights blinking. "He told me if I ever saw that vehicle arrive at a police station on its own, I should be inside waiting." I looked at this young woman, Julian's colleague, his contingency. The person he had trusted with the technical evidence he couldn't carry himself, and felt the specific quality of a plan revealing its final layer. "What's in the package?" I asked. "Everything," she said. "Julian's documentation of the algorithm theft, the financial transfers, the communications between Victoria and Hale going back 14 months. She paused. "And records of 2 prior incidents in other states. Different names, same pattern." She held my gaze. "Mr. Brennan, this isn't just a case for Cuyahoga County. The FBI field office in Cleveland has been copied on everything as of 40 minutes ago. The 3rd District station smelled like institutional coffee and old carpet, and the particular combination of fluorescent lighting and industrial paint that all government buildings in Ohio seemed to share, as though the state had made a single procurement decision sometime in 1972 and never revisited it. I sat in a plastic chair in the waiting area off the main entrance and watched the building do its work around me. Nora Gillespie was in a conference room down the hall with 2 FBI agents who had arrived within 20 minutes of her notification, moving with the coordinated efficiency of people who had been briefed in advance and were now executing a plan they had already mapped. I could see the conference room door from where I sat. It stayed closed. Kowalski came and went. He brought me coffee in a foam cup without asking whether I wanted it, which I appreciated, and he sat with me for 20 minutes going through the procedural requirements in the straightforward way he handled everything. What would happen tonight? What would happen tomorrow? What I would be asked to provide in the days following. Statement. Documentation. Timeline. Chain of custody for the recordings. "The Cuyahoga County prosecutor is already involved," he said. "The FBI taking jurisdiction on the interstate elements doesn't eliminate the local charges. Both cases run in parallel." "How does that work for Victoria and Hale?" "It works badly for them," he said. "Federal charges carry different sentencing structures than state charges. Having both running simultaneously gives prosecutors significant leverage in how they sequence the cases." He paused. "Arthur, they are not going to walk away from this. What you built in that house tonight, combined with what Nora brought in there, is no version of this where competent defense attorneys make it disappear." I nodded and drank the coffee and let that settle. Raymond Cross appeared from a side hallway, moving with the slightly dazed quality of a man who has been inside an institutional building longer than he expected. He found the chair beside me and sat down heavily. "They want a formal statement," he said. "Tonight, if possible. My attorney is driving up from Columbus." "Did you tell them about the prior incidents?" Nora's data covers 2 cases in detail, one in Pittsburgh, one in Indianapolis. Different victims, same structure. Financial consolidation through marriage, manufactured accidents, insurance claims. He looked at his hands. "Christian Hale has been doing this for longer than either of us knew. The Pittsburgh case was 8 years ago." He was quiet for a moment. "There's a family in Pittsburgh who lost someone. There's a family in Indianapolis." I thought about that. About the specific weight of it, that what had happened to Julian, to Margaret, to me, had not been the beginning of something, but the continuation of it. That the machinery Victoria and Hale had built and operated had run before elsewhere through other families, leaving damage that had never been explained. "They'll know now," I said. Cross looked at me. "Yes, they will." Nora came out of the conference room at 10:15. She walked directly to where I was sitting and crouched down to eye level, the way people do when they want to speak privately in a public space. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "the data Julian sent me included something I haven't told the FBI yet, because I wanted to tell you first." She held my gaze steadily. "There's a subfolder in the package labeled with your name. Not mine, not a case number, your name. Arthur. He recorded a message for you, 22 minutes long. He made it the same night he sent me the rest." My throat tightened. "He said—" She stopped, organized herself. I looked at the conference room door, at the foam coffee cup in my hands, at the plastic chair I was sitting in a police station in Cleveland, Ohio, on a November evening that had started with a pot roast and was ending with the systematic dismantling of the most deliberate cruelty I had ever encountered in 68 years of living. "Can I hear it now?" I said. Nora opened her laptop on the waiting room chairs between us and found the subfolder and pressed play, and Julian's voice came out of the laptop speakers at low volume, intimate and close, the way voices are when a person is recording alone in a quiet room. "Dad," he said, "if you're hearing this, you did it. You followed the GPS, you found the car. You read the machine the way you always read machines, better than anyone I've ever known. And then you did something I couldn't have done, something that required a kind of patience and steadiness that I've spent my whole life trying to learn from you." I set the coffee cup down on the chair beside me. "I know the last 6 weeks have been the hardest of your life. I know what I put you through by disappearing. I need you to understand that there was no version of this that didn't cost you something, and I am more sorry for that than I know how to say." A breath. "But Dad, you didn't just save me. Margaret's journals are going to matter. The people in Pittsburgh and Indianapolis are going to have answers they've been waiting for. You sat in that house tonight, and you gave all of them something back." The waiting room was very quiet around me. "I'm at the workshop on Denison Avenue," Julian said. "I've been watching the news feeds on my phone. I know it's done. I know you're probably sitting somewhere uncomfortable right now in a plastic chair drinking bad coffee." A pause, and something in his voice shifted into something younger and less composed. "Come home, Dad. I've been waiting long enough." Nora closed the laptop gently. I sat for a moment longer. Then Kowalski appeared in the hallway, and he walked over and stood in front of me and held out a folded piece of paper. "I think you have somewhere to be," he said. I unfolded the paper. An address on Denison Avenue in the west side of Cleveland, written in Kowalski's careful block print. I had known that address for 50 years. The Kowalczyk workshop where Julian and I had fixed a transmission spool on a Saturday, in July when he was 14 years old, where he had stood on a step stool to reach the upper bracket, where the smell of machine oil had been the same as the smell of my own garage, and he had handed me tools with the serious concentration of a boy who understood that this was important work. I stood up. "Frank," I said. Kowalski looked at me. "Thank you," I said, "for 20 years of showing up when it mattered." He put his hand out, and I shook it, and he held it for an extra second, the way men hold handshakes when they mean more than the handshake contains. "Go get your son," he said. Denison Avenue ran through the west side of Cleveland quietly, without ceremony, the way streets run when they have been carrying working people for several generations and no longer need to announce themselves. The Kowalczyk workshop sat 3 blocks off the main strip, single-story brick, the mortar gone gray with age, a roll-up door facing the street. I had not been on this block in 12 years. I parked and sat for a moment with the engine off. A thin line of light showed under the roll-up door. Work lamp light, not overhead fluorescence, the specific quality of light that meant someone inside was doing something careful and private. I had kept that same light burning in my own garage on 1,000 evenings, long after the overhead lights stopped making sense, just me, and whatever needed fixing, and the particular quiet of a space given over entirely to the task at hand. I got out of the car. The November air was cold and still. The way Cleveland air settled after midnight, when the wind off the lake finally quit and the city dropped down to its overnight register. My breath showed white. My suit was not warm enough, and I did not care even slightly. I knocked on the side door. 3 knocks, 2 quick, 1 slower. The same pattern I had knocked on his bedroom door for 20 years without ever deciding to. I hadn't realized I was doing it until the sound was already in the air. Footsteps from inside. Then the bolt sliding back. The door opened. Julian stood in the doorway with the work lamp behind him. He was thinner than he should have been, 6 weeks of irregular eating showing in his face and the hang of his shirt. Longer hair, a beard he wouldn't have chosen, but the same eyes, the same dark brown eyes that had looked up at me from a hospital bassinet 37 years ago when I was a new father, with no idea what I was doing, and complete certainty that I would spend the rest of my life figuring it out. He looked at me for a long moment. "Dad," he said. His voice broke on the single syllable, not dramatically, just a hairline fracture, the kind that only shows if you know where to look. I knew where to look. I stepped through the door and put my arms around my son. He was real. Solid and warm and real, the specific physical reality of a person you have known their entire life, whose weight you understand without thinking, whose presence registers not as information but as recognition. His shirt smelled like machine oil and old coffee and the staleness of a space lived in without being meant for living. None of that mattered at all. We stood in the doorway for a long time without speaking. And this was not the absence of something, but the presence of something that didn't require language. When we separated, Julian kept one hand on my shoulder. "You found everything," he said. "You left good trail markers." He almost smiled. "I was terrified you wouldn't find the GPS address. What if he just deletes it? What if he doesn't notice?" "Son," I said, "you put it in a folder named after my birthday." I noticed. The smile finished itself, the same smile he'd had at 12 years old on a step stool in my garage. The smile of a person who has done something they're pleased with and can't entirely hide it. I had missed that smile with an intensity I could not have measured until this moment when I was looking directly at it. We moved inside. Julian had made the space functional the way engineers made spaces functional, not comfortable but organized. A cot against one wall, a folding table with 2 laptops and several legal pads, a space heater working hard against the cold and winning only partially. On the workbench along the back wall, laid out in a neat row, were his tools, the same metric wrench set that had been hanging on my pegboard for the past 6 weeks. "You took the wrenches," I said. "I needed them." He looked at the pegboard. "I'll put them back. They were always yours." He moved to the folding table and held out one of the legal pads. Pages of his handwriting, dates, figures, names, a timeline running from 4 years ago to the present. "Every date, every transaction, every conversation I documented," he said. "For the lawyers. But I wanted you to have a copy first. I wanted you to see the whole thing, not just the pieces." I took the pad, his handwriting precise and economical, formed with the same care I had watched develop over 40 years. "Julian," I said. "Yeah. Your mother." I stopped and organized the words. "Ruth's pages. I found them behind the mirror." He sat down on the cot. I know. I should have told you sooner. When I found them 6 months ago, I didn't know what to do with the information. Then everything else happened, and I understood it mattered because it was the truth. Because she deserved to have the truth told. He looked at his hands. She wrote that she was saving them for you, that you would know what to do. She was right, I said. She usually was, he said, about most things. Outside on Denison Avenue, Cleveland was quiet and cold and going about its night. There were lawyers and statements and FBI procedures and a legal process that would take months, 100 things that still needed doing. None of them needed doing right now. Right now, my son was sitting on the edge of a cot in a machine shop, and I was standing 3 feet away from him, and we were both exactly where we were supposed to be. So, I said. I looked at the tools on the bench, the work lamp, the cold brick walls. You want to fix something together? Julian stood up and reached past me to the workbench. He picked up the metric wrench set and held it out with both hands, the way he had held things out to me since he was old enough to understand that handing someone the right tool at the right moment was its own kind of language. I've got a transmission in the back, he said. Old Mr. Kowalczyk left it here years ago, never got finished. I took the wrenches. Then let's finish it, I said. Looking back at everything, the GPS address, the warehouse in Parma, Margaret's handwriting on those pages, the dinner table, the workshop on Denison Avenue, I keep returning to one thought. I almost missed all of it. I almost dismissed that address as something Julian forgot to delete. That is the thing I want you to take from this grandpa story. Pay attention to the small things, the details that seem insignificant, the things people leave behind for you to find. Because sometimes the people who love you most cannot say what they need to say out loud. They can only leave you a trail and trust that you will follow it. This family story taught me that betrayal can live inside your own home for years without showing its face. Do not be like me. Do not wait until the damage is done to ask hard questions about the people closest to you. Trust carefully. Watch quietly. Love fully, but keep your eyes open. I also believe this: God does not waste pain. This family story broke things in me that I did not know could break. It also showed me what was unbreakable. These grandpa stories are about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment, tell me what you would have done differently. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Thank you for staying until the end. A note before our next story: some upcoming tales contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and perspective. If that is not what you are looking for today, no judgment. Choose what serves you best. But if you are staying, something extraordinary is coming.